The new channel. The new channel. Hashtag TNC Now.
The views, opinions, and insights expressed in the following shows are those of the host, producers, guests, and viewers. They do not necessarily reflect the position of the channel. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello and welcome to the new channel. Our passion transforms a whole community that sees all things new. I'm Alpha Sanford and I'm streaming live from Boston, Massachusetts. Good morning, good evening, mabuhay. Welcome to Once a Teacher, Always a Teacher. Hi, good morning again. This is Alpha Sanford, and I'm very grateful that you are here with me and my guests on this lovely Saturday morning. For today's guest, we will be talking about developing a pre-K to 12 budget with equity in mind. As you all know, for the last few episodes for season 2, our focus has been on equity, access, diversity, and inclusion. For this particular episode, I'm very interested in talking to one of the Massachusetts superintendents whose real focus is on equity. And she's going to be bringing with us today her knowledge on equitable services and really allocating public funds that are student-centered and with equity in mind. I know a lot of our school leaders, superintendents, directors, especially directors of finance, are really trying to do their best to allocate funds. However, with the increasing gaps when it comes to inequity in the field of education, we as education leaders must know and must have the skills to allocate funds that are equitable to every student. So let me introduce to you our wonderful guest for this morning. We have Dr. Susan Kustka, who is the current superintendent of the Holliston Public Schools here in Massachusetts. She has worked in the education field for 25 years, most recently as the assistant superintendent for administration and personnel at Weymouth Public Schools from 2013 to 2019. She began her career in Scituate as a middle school special educator in 1994. Before spending 10 years as an elementary teacher in Plymouth. She then transitioned to an administrative role in Hanover Public Schools in 2009. She holds a Master of Education degree in Moderate Special Needs from Boston College. In 2017, she earned her doctorate in education from Northeastern University. And then since 2020, she has been the superintendent of the Holliston Public Schools here in Massachusetts. So we're going to bring her in right now. And I want you to take down notes and listen to her as we gain knowledge in developing a pre-K to 12 public school budget with equity in mind. Dr. Susan, want to come in? How are you, Susan?
Good morning, Alpha.
Good morning, Susan. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you? Good to see you.
Same here. Good seeing you. So I am very curious, Susan, with your work on public ed. How have you been since becoming the superintendent of Holliston, and also for leading Holliston during the pandemic? How was it for you?
Well, it's like a roller coaster ride that I wanted to get off of, quite honestly. It's been quite a whirlwind, but not without things as well. I mean, I started July 6th of 2020 and had about 2 weeks to come up with a plan to reopen schools in the district where I had not developed any relationships with staff. And now who am I to come in and tell them what to do, right? Mm-hmm. But it was a short turnover. So I put together committees, we got input, and then we wrote the opening plan on July 28th and 29th, presented it in front of, I think, 1,500 parents watching to find out what was going to happen to their children. So I wouldn't necessarily wish all of that drama on a new superintendent, but it certainly made me even more resilient, and I'm proud of the work that we've done within a pandemic environment.
I can just imagine, Susan. I think it takes a very strong leader, a very strong superintendent, especially a new superintendent, to be leading a district, especially during the pandemic. So kudos to you and the rest of your team in making it through the pandemic.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So our topic for today is all about equitable school budgeting. But before we go into that direction, I'm curious, how would you define educational equity?
You know, I always think of the pictures when you see standing on boxes, and then, you know, when they have the child in the wheelchair, and trying to make sure that all children can have equitable opportunities for school. It's not about equal access. It's about what do individuals need to get the best education that they can. And, you know, one of the things I've strived to do is make sure, in particular, that our special needs students and our ELL populations, particularly during the pandemic, because that brings up even more challenges for some of our dual language children, as well as our special needs children. Not only were they dealing with remote, hybrid, full in-person for our K nation, but in addition now add learning disabilities and or language barriers as well. So I really was trying to think of what can we do better, particularly for these populations that are more marginalized, and make sure we have as much access as possible. Well, I wasn't able to bring all students back to school 5 days a week during the pandemic. We actually offered K-3 students, pre-K to 3, 5 days a week in-person learning from day one of 2020. So that was something that almost no districts were able to do. We took over a wing in our middle school, and we brought our pre-K2 population, one wing of students over there. And, you know, that was something that I was really proud about, that every child had a teacher in front of them in person, pre-K to 2, 5 days a week. And then our hybrid model, although they were in person and half and half, they always had a teacher 5 days a week, all day long. So we did something pretty dramatic and pretty impressive. So even though our children still suffered, I feel like they They didn't see the setbacks as much as some of the districts that were only doing 4 days a week or 2 days with the teacher. Everybody did it very different. We were all learning. This was all new to all of us. But I really tried to think of if I could get all of my special needs, high needs students in as our pre-K 2-3 population, at least that was a great start for everybody.
Susan, that's so impressive, especially, as a superintendent, you're really thinking about our students with special needs, and also our multilingual learners, and you prioritize them and you put them in front of a teacher. I can just imagine in terms of the social emotional supports that they got from the teachers during the pandemic. So very impressive.
Thank you. Yes, I'm proud of the team and all the work that they did to make that happen because, again, walking into the district, not knowing anything really about the district because we're in the middle of the pandemic. And that was quite a risk that we took by trying to offer that and maintain that throughout the year. It required extra staff, and we did add additional professionals able to support so that we would have one class was divided into 2 classrooms with 2 adults. So, it certainly didn't come without challenges, but I'm proud that it worked.
That's right. I think with your background in special needs and also being and your experiences in a diverse culture and in a diverse community, it has really lent you the lens of all means all, and really including everybody, all of our students, in order to move a school district in as equitable as possible in all aspects of their education, right?
Agreed. I know your background as well in special ed. You and I have had many conversations in the past about how important it is to try to keep that lens. And while my intent was to have been an elementary teacher in the beginning, my first position, as you noted, was as a special educator at the middle school level. I had not intended to teach middle school. I had gotten my moderate special needs training thinking that it would help me in the general ed classroom, which it did. But I have to say, the 5 years that I did in Scituate were incredibly valuable to set off my career. It forced me into the lens of looking at the individual student. And I think sometimes when you don't have that special ed background, you start with looking at the whole population. And that's a little bit more challenging to try to learn that aspect. So I applaud and encourage all teachers to get dual certification, regardless of what you're teaching, to have that special needs licensure as well. And that training is really incredibly critical to our students and helping them to learn in more meaningful ways.
I love it, Susan. You just embodied what, the IEP and the I on the IEP is. It's really looking at the students on an individual basis. That's wonderful. And I love how you are encouraging, the new teachers and individuals who are considering to be in public ed or in education to really have the background on special education. Yeah. So I'm wondering.
Yes, and obviously the training that are a lot. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah. I know we have a little bit of a lag, but continue on.
I was just. Yes, that delay. I apologize. Unfortunately, my location, I think it's challenging sometimes. Yes, I find the training that you do with special education is very applicable to our ELL population as well. When I redid my SEI endorsement, I felt like everything I had learned as a special educator were the exact skills and strategies they were teaching us in those classes as well.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So was there ever a moment in your education leadership journey when you realized equity is truly, truly a priority? And can you tell us about that, please? And why was it very important? Or it still is very important?
I think I always knew to some extent, but the more I became educated, I feel like every time I took another class as part of my various degrees and learned from other educators, it's a lifelong journey of growth, and that's what I always want to do. I certainly still have a lot of learning to do. I I really feel like when I switched, and I was taking my social justice courses in my doctoral program, even though I was trying all along to provide equitable opportunities for students, I don't think it really clicked as much until I sat in that class and heard from a variety of different, just different people from all over the world. The program at Northeastern brought people together because a lot of it was, through Blackboard Connect. It wasn't in person except for 2 weeks out of the program. So you were connecting with people all over in essence, and in particular all over the United States. So hearing stories from different people and what they had been through, I think really helped me to develop the lens. And then of course, add this pandemic and all of the things we've seen in the political climate. I don't know how you can't be living under a rock and not see that somehow.
Yeah, that's totally right, Susan. So in all your years as an education leader here in Massachusetts, and I know you've worked in many areas such as curriculum, instruction, we mentioned about special education and budget. How important is it for us to really talk about equitable allocation of public funds?
Holliston is a great community and a great school system, but I still think we can even do better. Prior to me, the principals had shared with me their budget experience, and they were asked every year to put together, what are the strategic initiatives? What would you like to have? And here we are in a pandemic, and it was the list that we were putting together sometimes was a real wish list, and it was every school's wish list. So I had to kind of change that. What are we looking for pre-K to 12? It can't be school by school pitting against one another, because we have to prioritize and align our curriculum and align our programs pre-K to 12. So I wanted to kind of break out of those silos and say, let's go back and think from the ground up. What do we need in the early literacy and numeracy development all the way up? Because I do think people focus a lot on high schools and where students end up, because that's where you see the fruits of your efforts, right? You can see that they've grown and learned and how they're ending up and how they're leaving the district. But if you don't put the priorities into the early years, then the end is not going to be as strong as well. And I also think we don't focus enough on what happens 5 years after they leave the school system or 10 years later. What is the measure of success used to say our students succeed? It can't be about how many AP courses they take or how many tests they pass and what college they get into. Did they graduate from college? Did they get a career? We don't put that long-term lens into our budgeting process and see if we're actually reaping the benefits of where we started. So one of the things that really stood out to me was that we were one of, I think, 31 school districts when I started in 2020 in the state still not funding full-day kindergarten. And that really surprised me, because we're a fairly affluent community, and I couldn't understand why we were in that minority of districts, because as you know, pre-K and kindergarten development, those early literacy and numeracy skills, we've got to start making sure our kids get a jump start in the early years. So 10% of our student population in kindergarten was entering and only attending full day K. Half day by choice or financially. So when I asked why that was happening, I was told, well, the parents can afford to pay for it. And I said, are you sure they can afford to pay for it? They're paying for it. Does that mean they can actually afford it? So I surveyed my community, the kindergarten community, and asked parents. It was August of this past year. What do we need to do to help you? Are you struggling to pay for this extra fee for your students? And if it were free, would you attend if you're now half day? Well, it turned out, I believe it was about 50 to 60% said they were struggling to some extent to pay for it. And then, of course, a small percentage couldn't afford it at all. So right there from the get-go, we were setting off inequity for our youngest learners, our most vulnerable learners. I took a creative approach 2 weeks before school started, and I thought, what can I get from the community right now? I can't get it into my budget. It was $600,000 right then I would need to give back to the families. So what I did is I met with my town leaders and my select board, and I asked them if they would give me some ARPA funds. As you know, we got one-time funds from the government. The community got one-time funds as well. So I got the town to agree to give us first year. They funded it fully through ARPA. Next year, we're funding it 25% from my budget with my ESSER fund, 75% with ARPA funds. The following year, we'll use 50, and then we run out of those funds. So the town has 3 more years to figure out how they're going to get this into the budget, but we're making it a priority and onto the community. And I'm so glad we did it, because now every child, we didn't have that 10% of students in half-day K. They all had full-day kindergarten this year, as they should have had all along. But that was me looking at how can we prioritize our younger learners so that our high school learners will be more as well. I'm sorry, 12 years later.
Yeah. Wow, Susan, that's really beautiful. Like, from a leadership perspective, you recognize there was some sort of an issue, but then at that time, because you were new, you were trying to validate whether there was an issue when it comes to equity, and there was. So what I heard from you is that you put out the survey to the community, you got the survey, you listened to the data that you got from the survey, and as the superintendent, you were able to come up with creative solutions that is going to benefit everyone, every student at the Holliston community. That's amazing.
Yes, I think creativity goes a long way. Additionally, I couldn't get any new positions in the budget because, a lot of districts were using their ESSER funds and sometimes ARPA funds to fund new positions, but that's not sustainable over time. So, worry about adding positions and then having to cut them in 2 years or 3 years later. But one position I did stand by because of COVID, most districts are trying to fund a DEI director of some sort. I actually, because I saw the trauma that students were undergoing, being in hybrid or remote, what I did is I asked the school committee to consider a person that would be an SEL director. And I said, I'll do it over 2 years. First year, if you give me half-tell person, and then in year 2, we combine it, make it a full-time director of SEL and equity. Because I felt like I could really sell the learning because of COVID and the setbacks we had had, and then I would get my equity piece in. Well, because they realized the need, they did. That was the one new position we added this past year, and I have a phenomenal director of SEL and equity. He's a Latino man, and he also has a licensed social worker background. He's got the absolute blend that I feel our students need to help develop interventions, and he's done a phenomenal job. So that only new position during COVID I was able to add, but it's also to help us move on that journey to equity over time.
Great. Susan, I feel like in those 2 examples that you gave, one of the things that I was able to get from you is that in allocating funds with equity in mind, especially, to districts that may not have the resources from the get-go, you thought of the process of going through like first year of budgeting and then mapping it out to 3 years, or in your SEL and DEI position, you map it out so that on the very first year, the focus will be again student-centered around SEL. And then on the second year, you will combine it, but you budgeted and you allocated these funds so that it's going to gradually get to where you want to go, and at the same time still looking out for the true needs of the community. Am I getting it correctly in terms of how your thought process went through in terms of allocating funds with equity in mind?
Yes, because with COVID, as you know, people were worried about our districts going to have enough money to do what they need to do. So people were hesitant to then jump on the board of a new position, right? So that year, wonderful that the school committee did support me to put it in the first year so that I had that full-time position, because now he's had a full year to start work. He's doing a lot of work with PBIS, and also we actually have new curriculum coordinators coming on board for next year. So he'll be working directly with them, looking at our resources and our curriculum to see how we can embed better resources to make sure that have a lens on equity within our curriculum as well. So I'm excited for the next 5 years, to be honest with you. We just developed a 5-year strategic plan. So everything that I'm talking about, we embedded in that strategic plan as well. So I would encourage people, when you're starting a new strategic plan, some districts do 3 years. I chose to do 5 because I wanted to have a long-term sustainable journey with clear endpoints in place. And what we did is the equity is embedded in my entire strategic plan, which is it's currently on the website, a draft version, but the final version will be up soon. And what we did is I invited the town administrator to join us in the committee. We had 21 people. I also invited the select board chair. I had 2 school committee members. I had 3 or 4 teachers. I had my 4 principals and my central office leaders. I had a couple of parents and a couple of high school students as well. So really trying to have a broad community approach. And we developed what I feel is a really rigorous strategic plan. But that's where I feel like I'm going to get the buy-in. We started with a survey on that as well, and 1,300 people responded to that survey. That survey told me what people were concerned about and what the community wanted. So that helped us kind of define our objectives and our strategic initiatives. But I really, one thing that I don't think I've heard of before is having your town administrator and select board chair on that committee, because if they're part of our 5-year strategic initiatives and they say that they're supporting work and they wrote it with us, well, show me the money.
Yes.
Support us by showing us if we can do this for the budget as well. So that buy-in is really important. And I'm really excited that they did take that journey with, and that hopefully that will help us kickstart if we do have budgetary requests for next year that we need to support the work on our strategic plan. I'm hoping that they remember that they were instrumental in part of that journey with us.
That's great. Susan, I've heard at least 2 times from you the power of survey, and also not just conducting a survey, but really analyzing and listening and using the results of the survey to inform your practices. That's pretty good.
Yes.
I think, yeah.
Survey burnout, as you know, is also problematic.
Right. But I feel like
so you do have to be careful about not over surveying. And sorry,
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. I know. We have a little bit of a lag, but go ahead. Survey burnout. You were right there.
I was just saying that, we surveyed parents a lot in COVID when we were trying to do our reopening plan. And obviously then I added these equity lenses and trying to get people to get the money back for funding full day K, and then also a strategic plan. So I'm also mindful of not trying to add too many surveys, because you want to make sure that the feedback you're getting, if people don't respond, you're not really sure if you're getting a broad community introspective there. So I'm mindful of that as well. But I will say, when I did send out these types of surveys, I didn't send them once. I sent them 2 or 3 times, and a reminder, the night before it was closed, things like that, as people do forget and put it aside. But when you send it 2 or 3 times, they might have been annoyed by me, but I got a lot more responses that way as well.
Oh, for sure. Now, Susan, when it comes to the survey results, did you also have like a town hall meeting to discuss the results of it? How did you involve the parents, especially in creating a strategic plan with equity in mind?
So most of that work was done with our committee of 21 people. And I did hire a vendor to facilitate that process, because I wanted to be embedded in the process myself. I did not want to be the facilitator in e-work. I didn't want it to be my mission and vision. I wanted it really to be the community's mission and vision. So the facilitator was great, but then they helped us really dig down into the data, and we had small groups really hash out, what things were showing in the common themes that were coming up. So we did that more in small groups, but in general, I did share out, graphs of the survey data. Anytime I do a big survey, I at least share out what the graphs are showing and the areas of the percentages and things like that. But the comments, sometimes you do have to be careful because they sometimes give away information that is personal related, and I also don't want to have names out there. So we were very careful about protecting any confidential information that came about from the surveys as well.
That's great. Any tips that you can give to principals and maybe other superintendents in budgeting school funds with equity in mind?
Really just trying to understand your audience and what the global community wants, and not trying to focus on the minute details. You have to kind of look with a wide lens and then dig down into what the true needs are. I do think sometimes we have a need in one building, but then when we look at all four, I happen to have 4 buildings. When you look at from a district lens, what are the needs of the entire district? So sometimes the need in one thing actually may not move the needle that you're trying to create for that alignment pre-K to 12. And then it's maybe talking about, let's put that into year 2. So, as I talked about earlier, you mentioned, I try to think of what's our multi-year process for budgeting as well. When I look at the 5-year strategic plan, we're trying to develop a 5-year budget process as well. So you can't really predict 5 years out what the needs are, but you can guesstimate and then kind of backwards plan to get there, and knowing that's going to change along the way depending on where your initiatives go. But similarly, professional development is really key. And again, I'm also trying to align, because of the work that we're doing with equity and cultural proficiency, I'm trying to also align the PD over a 5-year process. So we're really trying to get very strategic about having a well-laid PD plan for next year that aligns with all the work that we're trying to do as a district as well. And that doesn't necessarily have to equate to money. A lot of that PD will be done in-house, and we will bring in some people for some of it. But districts do not have the money to fund PD outside sometimes, and sometimes it's very expensive. And I think some of our people can do better in-house and teaching their peers. So I really love the train-the-train model, having some of our staff get training and then they bring it back and share out to our district. So that's a lot of the work that we'll be doing next year to help align with our initiatives.
Oh, Susan, you're just brilliant in thinking forward and also in thinking with equity in mind. You think it all. So in my mind, right? What happens to education leaders whose creative thinking or creativity doesn't come naturally to them? What do you think should they do in order for them to really have the pulse and understanding of the true need of the school district? What would they need to do?
I encourage people to reach out to their peers. I don't think we should be living in silos. We should be not afraid to ask for help when we need it. I think that also is a sign of a good lead. Being vulnerable, acknowledging you can't know everything. You can't be perfect. It's a process and it's a growth opportunity. I'm always trying to learn and do. I'm certainly not where I want to be. I always want to improve, and I want my leaders to improve as well. So I always say, every time I interview a teacher, and this summer we've had a lot of new hires come in, every time I interview a new teacher or an administrator, I always say, don't be afraid to ask for help. If it's not working, come to me even. I know that they don't always want to approach the superintendent when you're a new teacher to a district, but I always say, if it's not working, please don't sit there in silence and suffer, because you're not going to grow that way. Acknowledge that you need help. Ask your teacher leaders in your departments, and don't ask for help from the administrator. So I really try to encourage that, so they're not afraid to ask for help. And the same with my administrators. It's okay not to have the answer. It's not okay to sit there and do nothing about it.
Oh, thank you for those reminders, Susan. I find that especially in leadership, there is this quote that something to that extent that leadership is lonely. But what I'm hearing from you is, you don't have to be lonely as a teacher, as a leader. There is a network out there that you can get help and be out there and seek help if you need help. That's wonderful. That's a great reminder. Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome.
All right. So I think we're going to take a pause for a few minutes. And when we come back, I'd love to hear from Susan, her thoughts from a national level, why equity is, especially in school funding, an equity issue. So, folks, why don't we take a few minutes, and then when we come back, we'll hear from Dr. Susan Kustka, the Holliston Public Schools Superintendent here in Massachusetts, her thoughts and opinions on the national level when it comes to equity issues. I'll see you in a bit. TNC's live stream platform of online shows for people on the go. Please watch all our shows as seen on the screen. Imagine having your own show, your own playlist, your own contest, but we make it easier for you. TNC aims to transform the lives of our viewers through engaging, authentic, and original content. Our vision is to become a global 24/7 live stream channel that showcases Filipino talent, global influencers, cultural intelligence, and ingenuity. Please continue to support and to watch Once a Teacher, Always a Teacher on selected Saturdays, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time and 10:30 p.m. Philippines or Manila time. You can also watch us live or on replay via Facebook or YouTube. You can also follow us on IG, listen to us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Just search hashtag TNC Now. For sponsorships, please email now@thenewchannel.com or send us a DM. Enjoy these life-changing shows because we made them for you. All right, folks, welcome back. I'm hoping that you are learning a lot from Dr. Susan Kustka, the superintendent of Holliston Public Schools here in Massachusetts. Just listening from her makes me really think about how creative, and I appreciate the wisdom of Susan. So right now, let's bring her back in because I am interested in hearing from her regarding her thoughts at the national level about the equity issue. Susan. All right. Welcome back, Susan.
Good to see you again.
Yes. All righty. So we were talking about at the national level. Why is equity in public school funds an issue? And what do you think is happening, again, at a national level that is making it so inequitable to see one district spend a certain amount of money and some others don't necessarily have them?
Unfortunately, our country is the most divided certainly in my lifetime that I've seen it. And I do worry about what that brings to our students for the future and how we do better for kids. I do feel fortunate in Massachusetts that we are pretty united in the work that we need to do as superintendents, and we don't have as divisive of a population here. I do worry about not just countries, but other communities and states within our United States that are not getting funding for these things. And also, as we try to embed equity in the work we're doing, as I mentioned from a curricular lens earlier, we're trying to find resources that are representative of all students, whether special needs, of all different cultures, LGBTQ, so many populations that we need to consider and make sure that our resources are reflective of the students that we have in front of us, because that's the world that we live in. And I worry about the communities that are trying to say what we can't buy books that represent, for example, LGBTQ population. These are the children in front of us. We're not trying to indoctrinate, we're trying to show them that this is a world that needs to embrace and support. So, it is very divisive right now. And I do worry that, that this divisiveness could come to Massachusetts as well. But I feel at least at the local and state level, we are getting a lot of the support that we need to do the work that we need to do in Massachusetts. At my conference that I attended this week, the Mass Superintendent's Conference, we talked about the equity work that we're doing as superintendent and how we move that work, not in that and isolated. We're doing that work together. I do feel that outside of Massachusetts, you see real pockets of inequity where, politics and belief systems are tearing apart communities, are tearing apart schools. And I wish I had advice to give to those superintendents who don't get the support that I'm getting. My community and my school committee are very supportive of the work that we're doing, and they want to, fund it, and they also want to support us publicly with that work. That could change. I hope it. The districts that aren't getting that, and the states and communities, I do worry about how do we move a nation forward when we have these pockets of unrest and the divisiveness there. I certainly don't have the words of wisdom that I wish I had. Right now I can only focus, unfortunately or fortunately, I have to focus on the work that I can control within my community and the work that I can support.
Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes that's enough, focusing on the work that we can control and starting from where we are. And maybe by people seeing the work that we are doing, even though we are sometimes a lone soldier in this work, but as we continue to expand the work, then, I think we're doing the work, and at least we are moving forward in the direction that we want to see the entire nation and the entire world, so that we will have a more equitable and more inclusive schools. So, aside from Holliston, I'm curious, Susan, is there a model for a district that we can replicate when it comes to equitable funding? And also, what are some of the ingredients to a successful pre-K to 12 budgeting, aside from some of the things that we've learned already from you, with an equity lens?
Well, outside of your normal budget, obviously we have constraints we are a public school community and we have constraints, and taxpayers fund our school budget. However, I have been very fortunate that my new director of SEL and equity, as well as I have a new assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction this year. And I also just, this will be her first year, I have a new director of student services as well. So bringing these new creative lenses into the district also helps me think of how we can do better. They have been incredibly mindful of seeking any grant funds that and almost all of the grants that we've gotten are literally being used to bring more equity work into the district. So my existing budget may not support all of that, but I'm using every grant dollar that I can to bring in equity work, to bring in social emotional learning work. I mentioned we're training, bullying training, all of those are coming to the district through grant funds. So I would encourage people to really look outside of your school budget as well and see if there are other opportunities. With all of the physical safety of schools in mind, with what happened in Uvalde, Texas, and all these other places recently, people realize that we need to put money towards having safe and supportive schools. So some of that is about the physical environment. And then I capitalize on that and say, what can I use for the social emotional learning environment? And they go hand in hand. So we also have a safety committee, and I've expanded the safety committee because then we make recommendations as a team as to what we should be doing with these funds as well, or what we need to try to, if I can't use grant funds, then having a lens from the whole safety committee together that we are all bringing forth, whether it's recommended training or putting cameras in schools. And then that united lens, it helps me leverage things, because if you're hearing it just from traction that I need, but when I'm saying the entire committee has vetted these resources or vetted this work that we need to do, and that just helps me leverage what I need to do to get the funding that I have to have for some of the things that we need to move forward with. It's really been helpful having some new people come join me in this work with me. Also, really think it's important that people, if they don't agree with me, I always say, I want you to challenge me. Publicly, I hope we agree, right? But behind closed doors, I always say, let's talk about, is this something we should be spending money on or not? And then we work that out behind closed doors, and then we have a united front so that we can go and do the meaningful work.
I love it. Yeah. Two things that I took away from that, Susan, is that one, you've been lucky to have all of these great thinkers around you. You surround with new people who have expertise in certain aspect. And then number two, I heard in terms of being, a go-getter when it comes to grants, and being always on the lookout for some grants. So I think those are two great ingredients in order to really have a pre-K to 12 budgeting through equity lens, especially if you are new in the district, and especially if you don't have local budget resources that you can play around with. That's wonderful.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. So let's get to the educator point of view. We went from the national and let the district, And let's get down to the educator point of view. I'm curious, Susan, how does every educator begin to understand the solutions to equitable school budget? I am asking this because there may be some cases when teachers may not understand why and how some programs or some classrooms may have this and may have that, but how do they start to advocate or start thinking when it comes to equitable school funding or school resource and things like that? What can they do?
Yeah, I think it's hard when you're, having been a teacher for 15 years myself, it's hard when you're in the classroom, you're seeing what's happening pre-K to 12. And even at the building level, as a principal, you're looking at the lens of what your teachers need and advocating for your staff. But my lens is pre-K to 12. What do we all need to do this work? And sometimes that comes with people disagreeing with what I think we need. And that's, it's important to really vet the decisions that we're making related to the budget, making sure that, I may not always do it well, but I try to explain why we choose to do one thing and not another. And we have to be fair and reasonable. We can't just give all up. We want to make sure it's spread in a reasonable way so that all students are getting equal access to education. That being said, sometimes it means saying no one year. And as I mentioned earlier, maybe next year we can get that other thing because something else is more of a need right now. I also think it's important though, if a teacher, for example, asks for a specific resource, do I want to have that in one classroom? If it's a great resource, then we should be looking at a broader lens. Does the whole grade level need it or does the whole school need it? Those are the things that I try to really focus on, whether it's with curricular resources or technology, because that also can become a have or have not. Sometimes parent groups want to help support us in buying technology or different things. But then it does become, if I have a teacher who's very, has strong advocacy skills, those students get certain things and now other students are not getting them. So if there are resources that we are data driven and we have determined that these are some things that students need, then it's important that I make sure that we all get them, not just one classroom, right? So that's kind of the thinking I try to go with. If we keep going into these silos and become a district of schools, that's not the direction we need to go. I need to make sure that we're all like-minded and we are a school district that's all trying to move in the same direction.
Okay, I just want to emphasize to our viewers, Susan, that in that 2 minutes or so that you shared your thoughts about teachers' point of view, they need to go back to what you had mentioned because you gave lots of great wisdom in that 2 or 3 minutes answer that you had. I was also taking down notes, like in my mind, it's really important for us to share to teachers the reason why are we doing this? And not only that, we may have the reason, but we also need to back it up with data from, say, surveys or some of the information that we have, and be reasonable. And is it fair, right? Always go back to the question, is it fair? Are we really looking out for all the needs of the students? So teachers, school leaders, everyone who is watching or will watch this later on, make sure that you take down notes in terms of what Dr. Kustka just mentioned a few minutes ago. So with that, Susan, any last words or any inspirational message to aspiring superintendents or aspiring education leaders on the issue of equity?
I just think that you really need to keep an open mind and always know that we can all learn from one another. I mentioned earlier, I don't have all the answers. I'm continually trying to grow from my colleagues. I'm not the expert on everything, but if I have questions, I seek out my colleagues. I seek out my own administrators. I seek out my teachers and ask those questions. And listening, I've always been more of a talker than a listener. And I really have tried to focus on Well, at the end of the day, I still might have to make a difficult decision related to trying to make sure we do have equitable opportunities for students. But listening to people's concerns and hearing those before I make those decisions, and then making sure that, the justification and the explanation and the reason as to why we're going the direction we do is very important. You mentioned that already. People need to see, even if they don't agree with everything that we're doing, that it really goes back to what is in the best interest of students. And you mentioned the data. We look at our assessment data as well, making sure that what is the story that it's telling us. If we're seeing that our special needs students or our English language learners are not achieving in the same percentages as our general population, the data is usually pretty black and white, and that helps you leverage what you need to do when you're trying to take this work seriously and move a district forward.
Oh, beautiful. Wonderful. Thank you, Susan, for those words of wisdom that you just shared. And thank you for spending your morning with us this morning. And for all of our viewers, thank you for being with us this morning. I hope that you were able to take down notes and really learn from Dr. Susan Kustka when it comes to developing public school funds pre-K to 12 with equity in mind. Susan, if people have any further questions or would like to know more in terms of your work on equity, and also in terms of, your advice on public school funding and equitable allocation of funds, where can folks get in touch with you, or where can they find you?
So they can certainly reach out to me through Holliston Public Schools. My email address is on the website, and I'd be happy to contact them there. My home email is Sue, S-U-E, Kustka, K-U-S-T-K-A, @gmail.com. So you can reach me there directly as well. I don't have a strong social media presence. I'd say just because COVID has really made me focus on what I have to do as a superintendent. But, I do have a LinkedIn account, and I do have a Twitter account. So you can always reach me in those avenues as well.
Great. Awesome. We're putting right here how people can get in touch with you, because I believe a lot of would-be education leaders and even educators out there who are thinking of equity, they may be able to, gain more wisdom from you. And if they have any questions, they can always follow you on LinkedIn or directly email you for any questions that they may have.
Certainly. And, I hope I can learn from them as well. They might bring some ideas to me. I can always learn from others as well.
Great. Susan, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. And I wish you good luck in your education journey. I'm sure you will be touching a lot of lives and a lot of students' lives in Holliston. And I'm sure, you won't stop over there. You're going to keep on looking out for everyone within your control, especially with your passion and your heart focus on equity and diversity and access. So thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Alpha. Thank you for having me here today.
All right. Bye, Susan. Have a good summer and enjoy your time over at the beach.
You too.
Thank you. And to all our viewers, thank you very much. To all the school leaders, educators out there, continue to enjoy the summer, and remember to take care of yourselves. Until next time, have a wonderful day, everybody. Bye for now.